Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Nicole and we're going to be making an interactive art piece, also known as a toy. We're going to make a little garden that you can actually play with. So here I sketched out a design I made ahead of time and we're going to make some holes. This is so our veggies can fit into our garden soil. I'm using my Dremel to get them to the right size and I'm going to be using so many different types of clay. All of them are great. Now I went ahead and marked out how long my fences are going to need to be because every garden needs a cute little containment fence. I'm going to start off with using some Cos clay. This stuff is amazing. And I knew that this would be a weak point in the sculpture. So I went ahead and texturized it with my needle tool and of course my powerful toothbrush of texture. You want to get it on all sides. After you texture it, then you can cut it to size. Sometimes when you're doing the texture and working with it, it can stretch it out. So do this after you're done and make sure to texture those ends. Now I did this on some tracing paper. That's going to keep it from sticking. And then I went ahead and baked all of my pieces. And you can see why I use Cos clay. This stuff is bendy. So that means our fence isn't going to break off when we handle it. And we're going to start off strong with a mistake. Do not use glue like I did to put these pieces together. Use the proper liquid clay adhesive. So I went ahead and put together my pieces flat sides. So when you bake it, you're going to have one side that's flatter than the other, and those match up really nicely. And you can see we have a very simple but very effective fence. But I was missing the little nail detail, so I just added it with some tacky glue after, and this stuff did great in the oven, and we have a cool little detail. Now when I'm making multiple things of the same size, I like to start off with the same amount of clay. I also like to check that the depth is going to work and the size is going to work. Carrots are really fun to make and super easy. You just start off with that triangle shape, and then it's all about adding the details, the texture, and the lines. I made sure to leave a hole at the top so that we can add the leaves on later. Now my favorite part is making their faces. I looked up some cute chibi face designs. There's a ton of references online. And some of them I just kind of went with it and made it up as I went along. And of course, since I'm a fan of The Office, I had to make some beats. If you know, you know. Now these were super easy. I started off with a circle of clay, bring it to a point, and made sure to add a hole for my leaves to go in later. And yes, I'm going to use my rock of texture and my toothbrush of texture to give it some pizzazz. Then I went to town making some adorable little faces, including a radish who wasn't doing too well. And as all gardeners know, you win some and you lose some. Not every plant is going to survive, especially if I'm taking care of it. You want to make sure you make the design deep enough that paint can settle in there later. Now, for our green onions, it's just making that bulb shape at the bottom and then making a top. I went ahead and flattened the bottom of it and the top. We'll be adding the leaves on later. Then of course you need to add those fun little lines that go down the onion. I'm not gonna lie, at this point I was realizing how challenging it is to make faces that are not similar, but I dug deep and I figured it out. Now it's on to our pumpkins. I'm making sure to use some foil as our armature so that our clay doesn't crack. Pumpkins are pretty easy. They're very round with some lines. I'm making sure to push down on the circle a little bit so it's not a perfect circle and has that amazing pumpkin shape that we're looking for. Now make sure you mark out your lines. I tried freehanding it and my pumpkin came out very lopsided and weird looking. Now, once you have all your lines, it's gonna look a little bit like a deflated beach ball, but we're gonna fix it. It's all about shaping. Now here you can see we turn that flat edge into a nice rounded one and bam, pumpkin. Sure to add a hole in the top so I can add my stem, and then I texturized. After that, I created a stem using my toothbrush again to add some cool texture. Then you can do your vine any which way that makes your heart happy. And the best way to make a realistic vine is to add smaller vines onto your big vine. I went ahead and added some smaller ones, texturized them, and then we can move on to making some really neat leaves. Leaves really aren't that hard once you break it down. You start with a simple teardrop shape, then you just add the details. I just went ahead and made some leaves in different shapes and sizes, added them to my vines and blended them in nicely. After that, I can move on to the faces, and the pumpkins were fun because I had more area to work with. And let's just say one got a little sassy. One got a little angry. These ball stylists were great for working out detail and of course my needle tools. I wanted to make sure that the impressions were deep enough to hold paint and really stand out against the surface. This guy looks a little mad. Maybe he's mad that he got turned down by the girl pumpkin, who knows. Moving on to our cabbages. Cabbages are easy and a lot like roses. You start off with a large cabbage leaf, and then you're gonna go ahead and add a bunch of lines. I added it to both sides, and then to get that curly edge, I just used one of my tools. I should have shown me texturing the ball before I started adding the leaves, but I forgot, sorry. So texture the ball first, then start adding your leaves that look kind of like petals. I shape them up to make them look pretty, and of course I forgot to show adding the eyes as well. There wasn't a lot of room for a face, so I had to make do. Once my cabbage was all put together, I added even more detail because I can't help myself, and I used a little liquid clay softener to get rid of my fingerprints. Now, they've had their first bake and they're ready for more detail. I was really struggling with these tiny green onions, so I just went ahead, drilled a hole, and stuck them on a toothpick, and it made it so much easier. I added some Primo Sculpey to the top. This is a much stronger clay than I was using for the body, and then I just added the leaves, big ones on top, and then worked my way to smaller ones and blended it all into the bulb. Then I added more lines so that it was all seamless. I used way too much clay softener and a couple of my leaves fell off, so lesson learned. And we're just gonna say that it gives them some character. On to our beet leaves. I wanted one larger leaf with 4 smaller ones. The design is really simple and we're gonna do it on both sides. I made sure that my leaves had a little bit of personality and bend to them so they didn't look too flat. And I got rid of any fingerprints with a little bit of alcohol. I went ahead and used the same technique for my carrots. 1 larger leaf and 3 smaller ones. Now I'm well aware this is not what an actual carrot top leaf looks like, and I don't care because I'm here to have fun, not to cry. After spending a ton of time making a ton of tiny leaves, I went ahead and baked them. I realized after making my leaves that the holes in the tops of my vegetables was not big enough, but that was an easy fix. Now we're going to use some Fix-It Sculpt because you can use it like a clay and an adhesive. I stuck some in the hole, put the leaves in, and packed the clay all around the leaves. Then I could smooth it out with a little bit of water and add some texture, and it blended right in. The company does advise that you use gloves, especially while mixing the 2 products together and while using it in case you have any type of allergic reaction. I used some of my leftover clay to cover the unfortunately placed holes in the bottom of my onions as well. I also did not add roots to my onions because it would make it harder to fit into the soil, and I just didn't want to. I filled up the back of our wooden panel with some tinfoil. This is going to save us on clay and help me have something to build onto. Then I used cause clay and stuffed it in the holes, but also left a little room so that I could jam my vegetables into it. Now they were sticking a little bit to the cause clay, so I used some cornstarch and it worked like a dream. Some polymer clays can shrink after baking, so keep that in mind. Cause clay doesn't, but I want the fit to be a little loose to allow for added paint layers that I'm going to add on later. A rough paintbrush to add a dirt texture inside of the holes, and then I can bake it. After baking, I can remove the excess tinfoil, and yes, the back is ugly, but we don't care because that's none of our business. Now, I made this template thinking making this cute little wooden box would be super easy. Spoiler, it was not. I textured both sides of my clay, cut out my pieces, baked them, and assumed they would all fit perfectly together, which was not true. After a lot of sanding and reevaluating my life choices, I glued the box together, and it came out great. I decided to make a shovel to go with our little garden. Don't even ask me how I came up with this setup, but it did work, and I had to sand the life out of it afterwards. After 15 years of sanding, I can move on to the handle. For the core, I'm just using a wooden skewer. I think this is like a shish kebab kitchen skewer, whatever, it works. Anything can be an art supply. I went ahead and blended all of the clay together, and then I could texturize it using, of course, my toothbrush. After everything was baked, I could glue the 2 pieces together, using every artist's favorite glue, Loctite Gel Control. We all love it. It's because it works. I then used some Fix-It Sculpt, this time using the proper safety attire, and made the end round and the shovel blend together better. Now we can make some soil for our garden. I'm using a sheet of clay that I ran through my pasta roller and making sure to use some liquid clay adhesive to get it to stick to the wood. Then I'm cutting out all the holes so that my vegetables can fit into our dirt. Now it's all about blending. You want it to adhere to the wood really well and you don't want any air pockets underneath the clay. Then I just textured the heck out of it. To give the dirt some interest and give a little mound around our vegetables, I'm just adding balls of clay and then texturizing them. You want to make sure that your vegetables still fit into the holes after you add that. Then I came up with the brilliant idea to add magnets for the pumpkins and the cabbages. This was a great idea, but I messed up in executing it, and we'll talk about it later. But I wanted the little dirt mounds to be texturized as well and hide the magnets. After adding some final details, I went ahead and made some space in our sculptures for the magnets to fit into, then used the clay to hold the magnet. Sometimes glue isn't strong enough to hold the magnet, so I always try to use clay if I can. I went ahead and made some rocks to give our dirt even more interest and detail. I used a little bit of liquid clay adhesive and stuck the rocks into the clay. This will lock them in place and stop them from falling out. I went ahead and baked the top piece so I could work on the sides without ruining it. I did the same process as adding the soil on in the beginning, in nice sheets of even clay, working out any air and using liquid clay adhesive to stick it to the wood. Then I went ahead and blended it really nicely together and into the piece that was already baked. I went ahead and cut off any excess on the bottom so that the piece would sit flat. This technique I've used on smaller pieces that I've made, and this is going to give you an idea of what we're going for with our dirt layer. First, I want to make some lines, and this is going to differentiate the different layers of dirt that we're going to make different colors. Of course, always texture everything. You can't have a garden without some little critters, so let's make some. Starting off with some adorable little earthworms that I, of course, had to give an adorable little face. I love making a special detail for the back of pieces, so that's what this snail is going to be. I also made some adorable little roly-polies, and I made some fossils as well. I also decided to make a little ladybug that we can hide in our garden later. To make sure my pieces look like they're in the soil, I dig out a little bit of clay and of course add some liquid clay adhesive so that our pieces stick. In the perfect place underneath the cabbage to hide the ladybug, and then I went ahead and attached the snail. Our worms and our roly-polies got the same treatment as well. And since we're all about details, we're of course going to add some rocks to our other dirt layers, and one on top of our worm, who like me, will be in a complete panic instead of just going around it. To give our worms that 3D effect like they're busting through the dirt, we're going to add the little dirt clumps like we did with the top of our garden as well. Don't forget to texture. I used some liquid clay adhesive to get a little snail trail for our little garden snail. Now we can add the grass. I'm of course using liquid clay adhesive to get it to stick to the already baked clay. Then I just start adding the clay in clumps and start smoothing and shaping it out. Some places I add clay, some I move it around. This piece has a little bit of a cartoony feel to it, which is what we want. So we want our grass to match that vibe. I made sure to give the grass lots of shape and curve. Now originally I was going to paint this grass and just texture it very heavily, but I came up with a better idea for later. But let's get our fences in place. I used the fence to make imprints of where they're going to be in the grass, and then use an X-Acto to cut out holes for them to fit into. Then I add in my fence, and I use my tools to make sure that the clay is fit around it perfectly. That way our fence won't come out or move. I just repeat this process for the other two sides. I didn't add a fence on the third side because I wanted to be able to see it better. Remember how I talked about not using that glue and putting the piece back in the oven? And this is why. All the pieces fell apart with the heat of the oven. Just gonna glue the pieces back on now that I don't need to bake it again. Awesome, it's flammable. Cool. Now with our fences attached again, we can work on making this even cuter. I was thinking how cute it would be to have some seed packets for our garden. And of course, Etsy is the home of the weird and adorable, so I found this shop on Etsy, and voila! With the magic of editing, this took me forever by the way, I made these adorable little seed packets. I went ahead and printed these on regular printer paper and just put them together. They were pretty easy to do, you just had to make sure you didn't glue them shut all the way. Now that I have all of our packets, let's add our seeds. I'm using some micro beads, using a tool to help me open them up, and I even made a fancy little funnel. And yes, I know this entire garden set is not set to scale, and I do not care. I had a ton of fun making it, and that's what this is about, and of course the seed packets sound like little tiny maracas. And then tragedy struck. I'd like to say that I only dropped it one time, but this happened multiple times. My whole craft room was covered in microbeads. Vacuuming is going to be very spicy. And now you can see why we made a tiny wooden box. And the mistakes just keep coming. This is where I learned that if you put it in the oven, the heat messes up your magnet. Now they still worked, but very faintly, so it was a little bit disappointing, but now I know to add them after baking. Here I gave everything a nice primer of black. To keep anything from looking too flat, we're going to add multiple layers of paint in different colors and dry brush them on. I wanted that whole top part of the soil to be the same color, but the other two to be different colors. Here I'm just using a dry brushing technique. I did the same for our fence. I made sure that the fence and the box that we made were the same color because I like to think they were made around the same time. Did I make up a little bit of backstory and lore for my tiny garden in my head? Yes, I did. Then I painted the rocks on the top of our soil. I made sure these were lighter than the ones that were in the soil on the sides. Then of course our ladybug got her nice red color. Don't forget your nails. Painting is almost always my favorite part. It's where everything starts coming to life and looking really cool and matching the picture I have in my head. Here I'm just making sure that there's some contrast between my little layers of dirt. Once the dirt was done, I moved on to my ladybug and gave her her special spots. After that, I tried painting the grass and realized I hated the color and I did not like the way it looked, so we'll fix that later. But first, we're going to paint some adorable tiny fossils. Once my fossils were painted, I could move on to the roly-polies, who I both love and despise. I love them for their adorable nature, but I hate when they eat my plants. When I'm painting, I try to use at least 2 colors, if not more, for everything I'm painting. Here I'm starting off with a dark gray, and then I'm going to dry brush it a lighter gray as well. Now we can change that horrendous color green to the green that we're going to need later. Our worms got this lovely fleshy pink color, along with a pinky purple to highlight all their facial features and little segments on their body. With our snail, I added some browns and made sure to add a lot of detailing on the shell so he didn't blend in too much with the background. Our tiny shovel is ready for paint. I started off with a lighter brown for the handle and gave it a little bit of an aged look. I made sure to use different colors than my fence so it didn't all blend in together, and used about 1,000,000 layers of silver to get this metallic effect. Then I decided it was a little too clean, so we're going to dirty it up with some dirt. Now we can paint our vegetables. I thought I was so smart for using my paintbrush cup as a little holder. It did not work. They in fact fell into the water, and I had a little panic attack. After rescuing my carrot from his soupy death, I went ahead and painted all my carrots a dark orange and lightened up the area around their faces. It really added an extra layer of cute and made their eyes and mouths stand out more. I found a use for our horrendous green color, which made the perfect color for our carrot tops. I added a little bit of light to the tips to give it a little bit of variation and bring out all the details in the body with a little bit of orange brown. Then it was on to painting the adorable faces. Once I had my faces painted, I can move on to the pumpkins. I just did the reverse that I did on the carrots, starting with a darker color but highlighting it with a lighter color and using a darker color around the faces. Dry brushing is great because it helps bring out all the details. I went ahead and started painting the stems and the leaves. I tried to make sure that all of the greens that I used had a little bit of difference in color so that nothing blended together. I added a little bit of darker green to highlight our leaves, and then we could move on to the faces. I went ahead and made sure that our girl's mascara was looking good. Then on to our ragey little pumpkin. After that, I can move on to our cabbages. Cabbages have this lovely icy green color, so I made sure to layer the colors, but end up with the most icy green on top. I wanted to highlight the edges of the leaves to give it a little more interest as well. I went ahead and painted the eyes, and even with such a small face, I think they are so cute. For beets, we're gonna start off with this super dark purple and lay on this maroon color on top. It gives it a lot of depth and it looks really good. Then I add a little bit of purple to the top and blend that into the leaves a little bit. We add some green with a little bit of highlighting, and it's looking pretty good. This is one of my overall favorite faces, and of course we have our poor little dying beet. I add a little bit of brown to the leaves because he's not doing too well. A black base coat was not the smartest idea for these green onions, but we're gonna roll with it. I just wanted to do a green ombre from white to a dark green. I added a tiny bit of brown to the tips of my onions, and a lot of brown on my onion that wasn't doing so well. And of course, I was staring at this set and realized I forgot to put the green stripes on my onions, so I panicked and did that at like 10:30 at night and forgot to record it. I then coated everything in my favorite matte varnish, and then I used some satin and gloss to highlight some of the details on my pieces afterwards. Adding these little pops of shine and gloss really brought out some depth in this piece. After adding the satin and gloss coats to some of the items on this piece, I went ahead and decided to add some flocking for our grass. This was in the miniature section at Michael's. I don't know if it's grass or what, but I'm using a little bit of tacky glue here and just pouring it on top and then pushing it in with my finger to make sure it's really adhered. You want to make sure that you work in sections so that your glue doesn't dry before you add your mossy grass on top. I found it easiest to work on the detailed smaller areas and edges first, then do the larger areas in between. I really feel like this grass gave the piece more texture and just made it more interesting and not having everything made out of clay. Then I made my magic milk, which is Mod Podge mixed with a bunch of water, and then I soak it into this grass. That's gonna lock it in place and prevent it from being rubbed off. Thank you so much for watching this video. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more art tutorials.